The last passage, passage 5, is a conflicting viewpoints passage. And this is the kind of passage where you have multiple people that have a different explanation for something. And in this case, there were two liquids, liquid 1 and liquid 2, that were stirred in a beaker, and they were separated from one another after stirring. And student 1 said that they would separate by viscosity, which is a measure of a liquid's resistance to flow. Student 2 said that they would separate by density, and student 3 said that they would separate by polarity, and then they list some reasons as to why they think that. Number 25 said consider the following data, and it gave you the densities of 3 liquids. It says suppose that after the 3 liquids listed above were stirred in beaker 3, or stirred in a beaker, 3 different layers formed. Based on student 2's explanation, which of the following diagrams would best show the position of each layer? Okay, so you need to think about what student 2 said about densities, or about the liquids and what would affect them. And he said that they would separate by density. And he said that for his explanation of liquids 1 and 2, that because liquid 2 has a greater density than liquid 1, it cannot stay mixed with liquid 1. So he was saying that the denser something is, the further down it'll sink. So we got to pretty much order hexanes, mercury, and water by density, and the most dense will be at the bottom. So mercury, being the most dense, should be at the bottom. The second most dense is water, and the least dense is hexane. So what you should have from the bottom up, you should have mercury, then water, then hexanes. So the only one that was showing that was letter A. 26 says, based on the results of mixing liquids 1 and 2, with which of the following statements would both students 2 and 3 agree? Okay, so letter F says liquid 1 must be more dense than liquid 2. Well, that can't be the case. Student 2 would disagree with that. He's saying that, or she is saying that liquid 2 is denser than liquid 1, and that's why they are the way that they are. So it can't be F. H and J mention viscosity, or something being more viscous, as the reason. And student 2 says that viscosity has nothing to do with it. Student 3 says nothing about viscosity. Student 2 thinks that density matters, and if you look at what student 3 says, they say that student 2 is correct about how density affected the position of the layers of liquids 1 and 2. So they both think density plays a role, and that liquid 2 must be more dense than liquid 1. So 26 was G. 27 says, according to student 2, how does the mass of 10 milliliters of vegetable oil compare with the mass of 10 milliliters of water? Okay, well, student 2, if you remember, was making the argument that density matters. And what they said is that because each milliliter of liquid 2 has more mass than each milliliter of liquid, it sinks to the bottom. So something that is more dense has more mass per milliliter. So vegetable oil and water, vegetable oil is going to have less mass. The mass of vegetable oil is going to be lower because vegetable oil is less dense. It's going to rise above the water. So it has less mass, making it less dense, making it rise to the top. 28 says, suppose that a third liquid, liquid 3, was mixed together with liquids 1 and 2 as described in the passage, and 3 different layers formed as shown below. So you have liquid 1, 2, and then 3. Based on these results, student 1 would most likely claim that the viscosity of liquid 3 is what? Okay, so you need to look at what student 1 said about viscosity and how that affects where they are. He said that since liquid 1 formed the top layer, it must have greater viscosity. So basically, the more viscous something is, the more viscosity, the higher up it's going to be in a beaker. So that would mean that 1 is more viscous than 2, and 2 is more viscous than 3. So he would say at least liquid 3 is less than the viscosities of liquid 1 and 2, and that is why it is on the bottom. It says the more viscous something is, the higher it will be, so that must mean that liquid 3 is less viscous than the other two. 29 says if both student 1's explanation and student 2's explanation are correct, which of the following relationships would most likely exist among liquids? And so you can actually eliminate A and B because student 1 and 2 really don't mention anything about polarity, right? They're talking about either viscosity or density. And that relationship, you got to look at their two pictures. Basically, student 1 said that something's less viscous, it's going to be towards the bottom, and if something is more dense, it's going to be towards the bottom. Okay, so that would mean as viscosity increases, density decreases. So as viscosity increases, goes up, right, it's going to go to the top, and student 2 says something's going to go to the top, it's going to be less dense, or density is going to decrease. So as viscosity goes up, density goes down. For number 30, another student claimed on the basis of student 3's explanation that liquid 2 must be more polar than liquid 1. Is this claim valid? And so what you have to do is go look back at what student 3 said, and this last sentence here says, for example, water is a highly polar liquid and vegetable oil is a non-polar liquid. So you're not looking at something being more or less polar, you're looking at something being polar and something not being polar, and that's why they don't mix. So the answer was J. That would not support it because student 3 only states that liquids 1 and 2 have different polarities, not being more or less polar, but they're having totally different polarities.